My name's Steve Ouimette. I'm a guitarist, composer, and producer. You might have seen or heard my work on games like Guitar Hero, Ghost Recon Wildlands, Call of Duty Infinite and Modern Warfare, The Crew 2, and everything from networks from HBO and Showtime to ESPN, Food Network, and also for advertising and commercials. But for the last 10 years, at least the last 10 years, I've been working with Sample Logic on cinematic guitars. That library has gone through a lot of different versions. And now we're at the latest one, which is Guitar Fury. So I thought I'd take you through the studio here to show you a little bit of how I recorded the guitars and some of the techniques and some of my favorite instruments. So let's check it out. All right, so let's take a look at my recording rig. Probably the key element that I use the most is this Little Labs PCP distro. And what it does is it allows you to have one instrument in and then up to 3 outputs. So this is my main recording to go DI into the computer. And it also allows me to split it after the fact and reamp it to multiple amps at a time, or through, one effects chain that's just pedals back to a DI, or through an amp. What you'll see here is probably what I use the most for reamping, and that's a universal audio aux. And this allows me to use amps like this, which is a early 70s Trainer. It's a Bassmate Mark II. And that allows me to turn the amp up as loud as I want, and then I attenuate it through this, and then it goes straight into the computer via digital. You can also see that I've got a Roland Chorus Echo here, which is a tape echo from, I believe this is from the 80s. This is kind of the last unit they made. And I would use that sometimes if I wanted to thicken a sound or use it for a chorus. Not for delays too much, because we wanted to have that after the fact, so the processing wasn't always baked in. And then, of course, to get into the computer, we're looking at things like my favorite mic preamp of all time, which is the Undertone Audio, and this is an MPDI4. So this is 4 mic pre's and DIs. And then I also used an Aurora Audio, very similar to a Neve 1073. So that was the majority of it. And of course, the most important thing of all is the tuner. And I've been using the Strobo tuner from Peterson for a long time. And it keeps everything in tune real nice for doing these, because you're not going to want them to be out of tune for a sample library. Okay, let's take a look at some of the instruments I use for Guitar Fury. This first one is sort of, it's kind of an interesting instrument. It's called a Purgatory Hill harp. And as you can see, this is actually a cigar box, and it has a little kind of an armrest built onto it, and 2 shovel posts, as well as 1, 2, 3, 4 tuning keys, because this is actually a bass and a guitar. It has 1 bass string and 3, although right now I've got it set up with 2 strings that are played through different amps. So you actually have 2 outputs on it, and one of them just goes to a bass amp, and then the other 2 go to a guitar amp, or it goes direct into the board. And sometimes that's how I recorded the samples. There are no frets, so you play it with a slide, or you can also play it with your fingers, just holding notes down in certain areas, and it makes quite a ruckus. So that's that one. This next instrument is what's called a Marx Olin. And this was from a company back in the, probably the 40s or 50s, from Troy, Michigan, the Marxo Chime Company. And they made a lot of family instruments. This particular one looks kind of like a mini balalaika, but it's just a single string with I don't know what exactly they got this from, but it's maybe just a washer of some sort. And you basically play slide with a single note, or with a single string, and they had numbers listed with a songbook originally that you would basically follow the numbers, sort of like an early tablature for family instruments. But this also turned out to be a really cool sounding instrument, especially when we ran it through different effects and amps. So that's that. let me go get some more. This is probably my favorite of the bunch. This is a 1961 or 1960 Epiphone Newport baritone guitar. They only made about 30 of them, and it's tuned right now. I think I have it tuned to C, but they can tune all the way down to A. So when I sampled this one, I believe that I had it sampled down at A for the collection, and it's just a really, really beefy sounding instrument. It's got great tight bottom end, and it's super full and rich sounding guitar. And again, I ran this through the DI most of the time, and I'll show that in a little bit. But then I would go and I would reamp it to whatever sound that I wanted to get out of it. Okay, so that's that one. Okay, this one is another baritone guitar. This is a 90s Dan Electro reissue. Very low tuned. And I used 3 new pickups. I put 3 new pickups in from Curtis Novak and a special switch that gave you a lot more tonal options. And again, this was done like most of the instruments. I would record a DI and then reamp it with whatever effects or processing I wanted to get the sound out of it. So that's that one. This is another really interesting one. This is a Marxo chime, an actual Marxo chime from that same company that made the balalaika looking one, the Marxolin. This one was interesting in that it was meant to both strum chords, which aren't in tune at all, because these are the original strings from 1930. So they had sets of strings playing chords. You'd have like an E major chord, a C major chord, and then you would use a bow to actually bow the notes, just like you would have played the notes with the numbers on the Marxolin. And I plucked it for the samples. So it has a really interesting sound to it. It gets really creepy and almost clock-like sounding when you use it for the chords that are out of tune. But this one ended up on the library quite a bit. Once again, I would mic this and then run it through various processing and whatnot. So that's a few of the instruments from the library. Okay, and then a couple more things here. My favorite, the EBow. And this is for basically getting infinite sustain out of an instrument. You lean it upon, let me show you, you kind of lay it on the strings, and I'm not doing this right because I'm just holding it for the camera. But basically you turn it on and it uses an electromagnetic field to excite the string, and there you go. You get the sound of the string going. So infinite sustain for that. And super important is the capo. And the reason that the capo is so important is because my fingers would have bled forever and ever if I recorded 100 different guitars with multi-samples where I had 16 different versions of every single note on the guitar. So instead of holding the fingers on the fingerboard the whole time, I would capo this to the note that I needed. And then when I hit it with a pick or my hands or whatever it was, I'd get a nice clean tone out of it. Another piece of technology here is this mute, and it allows you to wrap around. I'll show you here. You can basically wrap it around the fingerboard and it mutes everything behind it, so I wouldn't pick up any extra overtones or harmonics while I was recording. And then finally, we have our all of the different varieties of picks. I use Fender picks the most, and it's very important to have an IHOP ashtray. I don't smoke, but I do keep my picks in here. So I've got felt picks, I've got Fender confetti style, mediums, thins, whatnot. And this little guy here is pretty cool. You can see this is a device that allows you to raise the strings up at the nut of the guitar so you can play slide. And you don't have to raise the action any other way than loosening the strings and putting this on. Raises the strings up, and then you use something like this slide to play the notes, and it comes out really clean. And since you can kind of see it here, here's a few more of the amps from the collection that I used. You've got a Sears Silvertone, that's a twin 12 head on the top right. and then an Epiphone 60s amp on the left of that, Fender Showman from the 60s, and then we have two just JCM 800 Marshalls. One's a super bass and one's a super lead. Well, actually, that's not true. It's a lead 50-watt master, and then the super bass is an active EQ. And as you can see over here next to my two iPhones, which I'll pull away, is the coax to SPDIF converter that I use to get to the system, which, as you can see here, is a Universal Audio Apollo X8P. And there you go.